Question comes on engrossment of House 4879. The chair recognizes Ms. Ferrante of Gloucester.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to chair the Economic Development and Emerging Technologies Committee at such an important time in the history of this state. I want to thank Leader Wagner today for his mentorship on this committee, especially a few years back when I served as his vice chair. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank your staff, especially Chris Eicher and Whitney Ferguson. I'd like to thank the chair of Ways and Means and his staff, especially Tim Sheridan, the chair of Housing and his staff, and of course, my staff, Tootie Haley, Dan Wood, Emma Stewart, Andrew Tarr, and Corinne Daly. I'd like to thank my vice chair, the gentleman from Burlington, and I also want to thank the leader and John Walsh of his staff for collaborating on issues of economic recovery and resiliency, which overlapped between our committees. When the Speaker asked me to chair this committee, he asked that the committee pay attention to all four corners of the state, especially each region's uniqueness and our state's economy. He also asked that the committee examine economic opportunities, to vet them along with all possibilities for job creation in all neighborhoods and all regions of the state equitably. I can tell you today that this bill meets the Speaker's challenge. Before I speak about the specifics of this bill, let me provide some background. Back in the spring of 2019, the governor assembled and appointed the Economic Development Planning Council of 2019. Each governor is required to do so in the first year of their term. As an interesting side note, it was a requirement that was created by the gentleman from Holyoke when he served as chair of this committee. This year, this term, I had the honor of participating on this council as the Speaker and the House's designee. Under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor, Secretary Michael Keneally, and with the participation of my Senate co-chair, over 36 business leaders from across the state held 9 regional meetings with more than 1,200 participants. In December, the governor and the council released the plan, and the 4 main pillars of that plan were increasing housing opportunities, support in vibrant communities, strengthening Massachusetts' competitiveness nationally and internationally, and creating strong pathways and pipelines to jobs for all workers. In early March, as would be expected, the governor filed his economic development bill. At that time, the Massachusetts unemployment rate was hovering around 4%. Massachusetts actually did not have enough workers to fill jobs, and revenue benchmarks were exceeding revenue forecasts. Yet in 2 short weeks, we purposefully put the brakes on our own economic prosperity to slow down the spread of COVID-19, to stop an invisible, fatal enemy that to date has claimed the lives of more than 8,000 of our family members, neighbors, and constituents. As a result, today, nearly 1.8 of Massachusetts workers are on unemployment. Our unemployment rate is 17%, one of the highest in the nation. Businesses are permanently shutting their doors. In April of this year, when the crisis hit and was in full swing, we learned that minority communities were disproportionately affected by COVID-19 because of limited access to preventative medicine, which resulted in a higher percentage of comorbidities in minority communities, limited access to affordable housing options, and limited access to economic opportunity. we also learned that minority communities also experienced higher rates of unemployment. In May, we witnessed right before our eyes the murder of George Floyd, which came in succession of murders before his. Protesters took to the streets and demanded equality. And with each protest, the voices for equality grew louder and stronger. All of us, whether we were prepared or not, confronted the notion that police brutality was only one form of racism. But we knew that there were other injustices, such as inequalities in economic opportunity and in housing. With that realization came a deeper understanding that if we, in this bill, did not give people of all races and ethnicities the same boost up to reach the first rung of the economic ladder, they would never be able to climb the rest of it and to succeed financially. Those of us who have worked to get this bill to the floor have considered more dimensions than ever before. Yes, the economic development plan that the Commonwealth created last year gave us 4 tenets to follow, but what came afterward could not be foreseen or anticipated. It required many conversations, a lot of understanding, and much reflection. As a Gloucesterite, I can say a perfect storm of crises fell upon us. But also as a Gloucesterite, I can tell you that I know, as storms rage, Gloucester endures, and so will the Commonwealth. And so now I begin to talk about some of the specific bond authorizations that address the 4 pillars of the Commonwealth's economic development plan. Measures to jumpstart our economy, help businesses survive, bring people back to work, encourage environmental innovation, and acknowledge equity and the potential for all people to succeed. This bill invests $370 million into our economy. To put that in perspective, the governor's last economic development bill proposed $275 million. This bill meets the challenges that COVID has presented in terms of economic recovery and economic equality. Relative to housing, highest numbers ever in a bond bill. $50 million for transit-oriented housing, $40 million for neighborhood stabilization, investment for sustainable climate-resilient housing, investment in our trial courts to hear eviction matters virtually. Relative to community development, $40 million to support blighted or abandoned buildings, to rehab them, to renovate them, investments in site readiness, investments in broadband, investments in our museums, investment in our zoos and our other cultural assets. Business competitiveness, $30 million to mass growth capital to create a PPP-like program for those businesses that didn't receive assistance, especially minority, woman, and veteran-owned businesses. $45 million to support investments in technology to make sure that even as our economy recovers, it continues to grow our economic development. $10 million in advanced manufacturing and investments in tourism. There's another aspect of this bill that I'd like to speak about, which is housing choice. And I can tell you that as those meetings were held, as people attended, the overarching issue time and time again was housing and the need for affordable housing. Here's what we know about our housing situation today in Massachusetts. There was before COVID-19, there remains a statewide crisis driven by a lack of supply of housing. What we included in housing choice in this bill is about production and meeting that supply. And in meeting that supply, we will create choices for our residents and our communities. Now, to put this in perspective, between 1960 and 1990, Massachusetts grew housing units at approximately 900,000 housing units per year. Since 1990, Massachusetts has been generating half, actually less than half, about 430,000 units. In general, markets are healthy when rents for rental units are around 6% and ownership is at 2%. But nearly in every county in Massachusetts, we are below those healthy levels. And as a result, rents have skyrocketed, home values have skyrocketed, and have increased well above average levels. Rents have increased by 75% statewide in most communities since 2000, and in some communities like mine have more than doubled. Massachusetts single-family prices were at the national average in 1990 when we produced 900,000 units. But we should not be surprised that as we decreased our production by half, single-family housing prices in the U.S. have increased to the extent of being the most expensive in the state. Housing costs in Massachusetts are third in the nation. Boston rents now lead the nation. A household is considered burdened if it spends more than 30% on housing. Yet in 2017 in Massachusetts, over 50% of renters were overburdened. If we can't house our people, we are failing them. And if we cannot house our workers, then we will continue to lose them to other states that we compete with in the economic setting. We must pass housing choice today because it makes no sense to spend the amounts of money that I discussed previously in bonding in order to meet this crisis without real zoning reform. Finally, in this bill we find sports betting. Voters in Massachusetts have expressed their interest in being able to bet on sports legally. It is naive for us to believe that if we do not legalize sports betting, that it will fail to exist. Today, sports betting is occurring illegally in Massachusetts. It's occurring here. It's here already. So in this bill, relative to sports betting, we accomplish 4 goals. The first, we bring sports betting into the light and remove it from the illegal market, where illegal gaming appears to foster additional criminal activity. 2, we raise much-needed revenue for the Commonwealth in a time of economic crisis. 3, with that revenue, we fund economic empowerment initiatives to create business growth, job creation, and workforce development in some of our most vulnerable communities. And 4th, we protect the Commonwealth's investments in the gaming and the technology innovation industries. Mr. Speaker, it's with great pleasure that I come before you today on behalf of my committee members, especially with my vice chairman, the gentleman from Burlington, who was so helpful in this process and in the management of our committee, to ask the support and to ask that each and every one of our members here in the chamber today and who are listening remotely support this bill. And I ask that when a vote is taken on this bill, there be a call of the ayes and nays.